Hello, Dr Sharon Brimfield-Edwards here again. Today I want to be talking about domestic abuse, particularly about the cycle of violence. Now we touched on the cycle of violence in our previous videos and in my previous videos, so I just wanted to elaborate a little bit about that today. So if we start by saying, if you yourself feel that there's something going wrong in your relationship and you are starting to blame yourself, then I just wanted to tell you a little bit about a theory that adequately accounts for why the problems in your relationship may not necessarily be down to you yourself. So I want to be talking today about a theory that was developed in 1979 by domestic abuse researcher Lenore Walker. So let's talk about the cycle of violence. So we've got a poster here, the cycle of abuse, or as it's also called, the cycle of violence. Before I go any further, just want to acknowledge that this is a free download from the website familytransitionplace.ca, which is a women's shelter in Orangeville, Ontario, Canada. And you will be able to find that if you looked on the website there for yourself. So looking at this research, Walker found that many relationships followed a common pattern or cycle, and we've got them outlined there on that poster. The entire cycle may happen in one day, or it may take weeks or months. It is different for every relationship, and not all relationships will follow the cycle. Many report a constant stage of the crisis phase, or where the physical abuse takes with little relief. So looking at this poster, we've got the cycle as three parts. The first part, phase one, is where the tension building phase is. This is where the tension will begin to build up between the both of you if you're in an abusive relationship, and the perpetrator or your partner's behaviour will increasingly become more tense, more irritable, more impatient, or they may become very short-tempered. Tension builds over common domestic issues like children, jobs, money, anything that's normal in your relationship, and the verbal abuse will begin. Now, during this time, it's impossible, would be impossible for you to control the situation. So what normally happens in situations like this is that the victim, they will actually try to please the abuser. They'll be giving in or trying to avoid the abuse. None of these will stop the violence. Eventually, the tension reaches a boiling point and the physical abuse will begin. So we're looking at the next phase, as they've got here on this post, it's called the acute battering phase. We know it in the UK as the crisis phase. So during this phase, this is when the tension peaks and the physical violence or the emotional abuse or the psychological abuse will become more intense. It's usually triggered by the presence of an external event or by the perpetrator or the abuser's emotional state. Importantly here, once again, it's important for you to understand it's not triggered by your behaviour. This means that the start of this period is unpredictable and beyond your control. And I have to say that during this phase 2 part of this cycle of violence is the risky phase where a victim can get hurt the most. And lastly, we'll look at the phase 3, which is, as we've got on here, the honeymoon phase, and in the UK we actually call it the reconciliation phase. This is where the abuser is ashamed of his behaviour. Following the release of all the tension that has been expressed during phase 2, during the crisis phase, the abuser will begin to feel remorse and say that they are sorry and this will never ever happen again. They may exhibit loving, kind behaviour followed by apologies, generosity and helpfulness, and there will be genuine attempts during this phase to convince the partner that this abuse will never happen again. Now this stage is the critical stage for binding the relationship together as the victim experiences intense demonstrations of love. It strengthens the bond between partners and will probably convince the victim once again that leaving the relationship is not necessary. Importantly, if you've got caught in this relationship, then the thing to remember is to recognise that you found yourself got caught up in what is called the cycle of violence. This will continue over and over, and it does explain why many victims stay in abusive relationships. The abuse may be terrible, but the promises and generosity of the honeymoon phase give the victim the false belief that everything will be all right in the future once again. If you have been listening to this description of the cycle of violence or a cycle of abuse, then and this all feels very familiar to you, then I would ask you to consider this. If your partner was a good person, then they would not want to hurt you. And in terms of you finding yourself in such a relationship, all you have done is put your trust and given your love to another human being in the hope and expectation that they would love you back.